Hello everyone, this is Maz. If you're hearing this message, it means you're not part of the Voices of War subscriber community and will only hear the first half of the episode. If that's enough, then I'm thrilled. However, if you're looking to dive deeper into the complexities of war, please consider subscribing to our private feed by using the link at the top of the show notes. By doing so, you'll gain access to all of our episodes, the ability to ask follow-up questions, and will become part of an exclusive community that makes this show possible. I hope you'll make the decision to join us today.
So the definition of status is really the feeling that we are of value to other people, specifically of value to our tribe. I think people sort of massively underestimate culture. I think, people think of culture, they think of, music and, what books you're reading and stuff. And it's like, it's not, it's deep. It's the operating system through which you experience reality. So if we feel that somebody else is unfairly taking our status, then the moral thing to do is to attack that group and destroy that group. The Nazis thought they were the good guys. They sincerely believed they were the good guys. The communists thought they were the good guys. Lenin thought he was a good guy. Stalin thought he was a good guy. Fewer people are going to die if they get around the table today and try and figure this out. But we're storytellers. And so we're not trying to figure out how to make fewer people die. We're trying to figure out who's going to win this great story of good and evil.
My guest today is Will Storr, who is an award-winning writer whose work has appeared in titles such as The Guardian, The Sunday Times, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. He's the author of 6 critically acclaimed books, including Selfie, How the West Became Self-Obsessed, The Heretics, Adventures with the Enemies of Science, as well as the Sunday Times bestseller, The Science of Storytelling. He also recently published the book Status Game on social position and how we use it. And he joins me today to explore how status influences our behaviour, relationships, and how it contributes to so much of what's good as well as bad in our world. Will, thanks for joining me on The Voices of War.
Thanks for having me, Maz.
So before we dive into status and what it does to us, maybe it's worth getting a sense of your background. What motivated you initially to become a writer, and how did you land upon topics such as the self-obsession of the West, enemies of science, and most recently status?
Well, I always wanted to be a writer, and what happened was I kind of left school without any sort of qualifications, really, having behaved very badly, and started sort of hanging out with bands and writing about bands and interviewing bands back in the 90s. So that's how I began as a writer.
Yeah, and then how did you get into these particular topics of? I guess firstly the self-obsession of the West, enemies of science, and then ultimately status.
Well, really, it's about my second book was called The Heretics, and it was looking at why is it that smart people end up believing crazy things? So how is it that really, really smart people end up believing in the literal truth of the Bible, for example? And so to answer that question, I had to sort of find out about how the brain worked, how the mind worked, and that sort of led me into psychology, really. So kind of what I write about, what all my books are really about, are kind of applying sort of the latest kind of psychological ideas to the world and the self.
So what's the answer? I haven't read Heretics, but it sounds like an interesting book anyway that I might look up later on. But what is the answer? Why do otherwise intelligent people fall for the kind of literal translations of certain stories and narratives?
Well, because the brain isn't a machine for detecting truth. The brain's a storyteller. So we tend to uncritically accept any idea that flatters our sense of who we are, flatters our kind of heroic narratives about ourselves and the world, and just reject any argument that makes us feel uncomfortable and undermines the story we like to tell of the world. And intelligence is no inoculation for these effects. So intelligence makes you better at finding reasons to defend your positions. It doesn't make you any better at finding out, intelligent people don't seek contra arguments more than people who aren't intelligent. So there's a sense in which being intelligent kind of is more likely to lead you down these kind of crazy rabbit holes.
Really? Okay, that's really interesting. And how does that then? I'd imagine that also then fits into our idea of status and how we perceive status, especially when we're talking about the kind of the mind being a storyteller. In that story, we also defer some status to ourselves and imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. That's at the center of the story. The brain likes to tell of the world. I mean, in the Heretics, I call the brain a hero maker. It's kind of what it does. In a healthy brain, if a brain's functioning as it should be, it's making us feel kind of irrationally heroic, that all our positions are correct, that we have this sort of optimistic future in store for ourselves, that we're kind of special in various ways. So yeah, that is so. Obviously, status is deeply kind of linked to these processes.
So maybe before we dive into status in more detail, how do you define it firstly, and then what is its purpose? Because I know in the book you talk about there's an evolutionary reason behind even the purpose of status.
Yeah, so the definition of status is really the feeling that we are of value to other people, specifically of value to our tribe. So humans are a tribal species. We have tribal brains. That's what we do. We humans gather into groups to solve problems, and those groups can be, national groups or political groups or hobby groups or football groups, or that's what we do. We gather into groups and solve problems, and that's as a result of our brains, which are kind of tribal. We are compelled to join cooperative groups to kind of engage in kind of status competitions. So we've evolved to want to feel that we are of value to the kind of other players in our teams. So because that's evolution's kind of incentive to stop us prioritizing ourselves individually and start prioritizing our tribes. So it's kind of a human universal. If you tell someone they're useless and they have no value, they feel bad. And obviously the opposite of that is if you tell people that they're fabulously useful and intelligent and talented, and they feel good.
Oh, that works for you too. Right.
And that's status. Yeah, that's that. And historically, on an evolutionary scale, that there are huge rewards for pursuing status. Like in the pre-modern groups in which we evolved, the hunter-gatherer groups, the more status you earned, the more food you got, the better food you got, the safer your sleeping sites, the greater your access to choice of mates. So it's this basic rule the subconscious brain has, which is go for status. Because if you go for status, everything else gets better. And of course, that's what was true tens of thousands of years ago remains true today in the modern world. No matter where you go in the world, the more status you get, the better everything else gets in your life. For the greater your capacity to survive and reproduce.
And I'd imagine most people wouldn't be surprised to hear that, because it does feel rather intuitive, right? The kind of higher status you've got, the kind of more resources you've got, the better life is. But I was amazed to read that it actually has an impact on your health markers, right? So I think you write comparisons of people in there who, both smokers, both like same likelihood of developing serious heart disease, etc. But it really was status that determined ultimately who would get sick and who wouldn't, which is great. Yeah, sorry, on. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said that most people wouldn't be surprised to hear that, but a lot of people are. A lot of people don't like it. Some people who hear the message of the book get quite upset about it because they feel like it's kind of demeaning to the human condition. The
Really?
idea that the great artists, the great leaders, these people that we look up to and call heroes were motivated in any way by social status is that they find it
really?
like
Okay.
a terrible. I know. Wow. It's crazy. Okay. And I think they take it as a personal insult too. Well, I don't pursue my goals because I'm interested in status.
That's
dear God, no. It's because I really want
I'm
to.
good and I'm righteous and I'm
exactly. And that's the hero making brain in action. That's literally the hero making brain in action. I think that's why I think it's useful to see it in evolutionary terms, which is it's just the feeling of being of value. I think it takes this thing away. I think what happens when you talk about status is that people think you're saying everybody wants to be rich, everybody wants to be famous, everybody wants to be Kim Kardashian, which is not what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but everybody wants to, I guess, procreate, even if it's a subconscious programming that exists. Everybody wants to secure their offspring, etc., and that you achieve that by, I guess, the second order effect of status is all of those things, and I think
we all want to succeed. Yeah, we all want our lives to get better, and the way they make your life better is by pursuing status. In no matter what domain you're kind of living in, it's pursuing status. That's the basic, ultimate, goal of not all of human life, but a lot of human life.
And there were particular games, or I guess you write about 3 particular types of games that we play. What are those?
Well, again, you have to go sort of back into our evolutionary history, and so before we were even human, the way that we would pursue status and have status sort of contests is with dominance. So with literal physical aggression and the threat of aggression, and of course that's the main game in the animal world to today. Like it's not the only game, but it's the main game. But then when we sort of became recognizably human, when we started sort of living in cooperative groups, like you can't live in a highly cooperative group if everyone's just bullying each other all the time and attacking each other all the time, obviously, because it would just be a nightmare. So a great part of our becoming cooperative, which is kind of our secret sauce as an animal, this amazing capacity we have for working together and solving problems together. You have to pursue status contests in different ways, and so that's when this kind of value thing comes about. So you're incentivized to be of value to the tribe. And there are 2 ways of being value to the tribe. The first way is by being a good person, a morally good person. So that might mean being selfless with your provisions, being courageous in battle. But it means also believing, like sincerely believing the sacred beliefs of the tribe. No matter how crazy they are, you believe them, you follow the rituals, you take it seriously. And it also means policing other people's moral behavior. So that's virtue status. So that's one way that you pursue status. And that's one.
I mean,
kind
you've
of
just
game.
described Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so much of Twitter is that. But also, it's religion. The Pope is a superstar, but he's a superstar not on the basis of any technical ability or. He's purely a superstar on the basis of his virtue. And then the second way that you're a value tribe is by being useful. So by being skillful, and so by being a great hunter, a great honey finder, a great storyteller, and so that's the other kind of status game, which is a kind of, I call it a success game. It's based on competence and ability. So that's the other way that you can pursue status. So the Pope is virtue, and you might say that Serena Williams is a success game winner.
That's there are so many aspects of the book. As I said, I've got the Kindle version, and one of the downsides of the Kindle is I end up highlighting everything. So I've got 26 pages of notes. But this really stood out to me because I could see when I read dominance, success, and virtue games, and then I started thinking about things in my life that are important to me. In other words, the games I play, and I could very clearly define what fits where, and it really visually captured very well for me the idea of status and how important it is, and literally that it's literally everywhere. And that was a kind of an eye-opening moment for me, I guess, with the book, is to. That's what I was meaning before. The status kind of seems intuitive. We kind of all perhaps understand, have an idea of what status might be, or perceive somebody of high status, or we can think of somebody who has high status. But I just don't think we delve that deeply into it as to how prevalent it is and everything. And that's why it's interesting to hear that, most people don't think about it. I find it quite fascinating. Yeah,
and as you say, you've only got to look at social media. I mean, it's just very illustrative to me that what social media has done. The current figures are there's more than 4 billion people on social media, which is more than half the population of the world. It's mad. Yeah. And so what happens when you connect 4 billion human beings together and just sit back and allow them to communicate? Well, dominance, virtue, and success. That's what it is. They're pushing each other around. They're doing their virtue stuff. They're parading their sacred beliefs and policing other people's sacred beliefs, and they're showing off their success, and they're showing off their holiday and their their promotion and their lovely thin body or whatever it might be. That's what humans do. It's dominance, virtue, and success, and so that's why social media is like it is. It's not because it's been devised that way by evil Silicon Valley tech bros. It's just that's just what happens when humans get together. Dominance, virtue, and success. Yeah.
Well, it's a product of human motivation, right? So therefore, it represents human motivations, just in a digital form, which is also very scary because it's also really polarizing. I guess if you say 4 billion people, that's scary given the algorithms are fueled by these games as well. And you mentioned before that status seeking is a universal need. Does culture have any role in how people play the game or how they perceive the game? And then, of course, how does that impact when we're talking, when we're having intercultural communication or international relations? How does status play a role?
Yeah, I mean, culture has a huge role to play, and so the basic the way the brain works is that there are basic fundamental kind of wired in DNA rules that all brains share, and these rules are the basic kind of blueprint of the human condition. So the basic blueprint of the human condition is things like gather into groups, pursue status, right? So it's quite basic, but on top of that. So that's kind of the hardware of the computer. And on top of that, you layer the software, which is culture. And so the culture kind of tells you how to play the game. It tells you, what does status mean in this community?
What are the rules? Yeah.
What are the rules? So those rules change sort of dramatically as you move through history. They change dramatically as you go, around the world. I mean, in the book, I talk about these crazy kind of table manners rules that were going on in the medieval Britain, where it was seen as rude to hold vomit in your throat. It was much more polite to just vomit everywhere. Like it's mad, just crazy.
It's like a Sunday night in the mess,
yeah, and it's like there was one. I think it was the first ever etiquette book, and it said if you're sharing a bed with a stranger. And you find a piece of shit in the bed, it's rude to pick it up and say, smell that. It's just unbelievable that people need to be told that. But also as you go around the world, in like the most studied differences culturally of East versus West. So, the Western Europe versus East Asia. And the West famously is much more individualist. So what that means is that we play status games a bit more on the individual level. We see ourselves as individuals. We're still groupish, but there's a much more emphasis on the individual, on individual heroism, and on pushing yourself forward and being the superstar. Being the one that stands out. And in East Asia, it's much more about the group. It's about the group, and so one of the ways that manifests. I read this paper on how. The concept of face works in Japan, and a Japanese sociologist was saying that if you're working for a company and you get singled out for praise within your group, in the West you're like that's great. Well, hey, I'm the winner. But in Japan it's seen as terribly shaming because what you've done is you've made the rest of the group feel bad. And so instead of being a motivating thing, what will happen often in Japan is that the individual who's been singled out for praise will deliberately do a terrible job for the next few weeks in order to kind of remove the stain of that praise and make everybody else feel better. So it's a very profound influence on, and that's why you get culture shocks as you go around the world, because the things that you think that you're doing that should earn status, that should make you mark you out as a valuable person who knows manners and politeness, they don't work anymore, so you get this very alienating kind of confusing sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think you also cite Michel Goffon's work on tight and loose cultures and how the norms that are embedded in a culture are defined by, I guess, the threat that particular culture feels, and also that's even within that are status games, and I think that's where this conflict might occur because norms are developed under a vastly different set of circumstances. When you then come in as an outsider, you simply don't know the rules of that game, and very often you can well, you can become part of a problem rather than part of a solution. This is something I've discussed on the podcast in the context, in military context, in relation to Afghanistan, as Western forces going into a country like Afghanistan and expecting certain rules, norms, behaviours, etc. Of our partnering forces, but just never really having an idea of how that place works. And when you don't understand the games people are playing. You're not in the game.
You're not exactly because you're not follow. You don't. You got to know the rules in order to follow them. And yeah. So yeah. It's I think people sort of massively underestimate culture. I think people would think of culture, they think of music and what books you're reading and stuff. And it's like it's not. It's deep. It's the operating system through which you experience reality.
Yeah.
So and that's why I think on a military level, that the idea that we had in the West that we could just go into Iraq and give them the gift of democracy was just incredibly naive from a psychological basis, because you can't go into a place that isn't Western and just give them the gift, in inverted commas, of Western values, because they don't have Western brains. From the age of 0 to mid-20s, brains are literally being formed physically. Around the basis of the local culture, the local rules for life, what's good and what's bad, how should the world work? It forms the structure of brains. You can't just go in there and give them a different operating system.
That's right.
It's not that simple.
Reinstall. And I think that's but that also plays into the status game, right? Because if you're coming in and this is us as the West, there's a perceived superiority immediately in us enforcing our game. We know this game better than you do, so here's the game that we want you to play. And of course, if you're the recipient of that, that's going to have in some instances, it's going to be hugely dishonorable and bring shame upon you, especially if you don't have the means. If it's a dominance game, like in a military context. I suspect many of my listeners can relate to that when we think about what's happened in Afghanistan and what's happened in Iraq, and how little success ultimately we've had in this process of democratization. That's ultimately, certainly in Afghanistan, has failed miserably. There was one other thing that that really hit a nerve when you were talking about it, and that was that a rapid loss of status can actually have or falling outside of the rules or outside of your group can have a detrimental impact to one's psychological well-being, which kind of speaks to this point. And there's a direct correlation between, increase in the likelihood of suicide. Can you just talk about that a little bit more? Because I think that's going to be hugely relevant for many in my audience.
Yeah, so I failed to answer a previous question, which is connected to you asking about the health implications of status, and so it's been found that essentially the lower status that we feel that we are, the more likely we are to become sick, physically sick, but it's also because the brain kind of translates low status into a harsh environment, a dangerous environment, and puts you into this state of inflammation, which when you in this inflammatory state for a long time, you have chronic inflammation, it's very bad for you and raises your capacity to the likelihood that you're going to get heart disease or cancer and everything, autoimmune dysfunction and all that stuff. But also, it clearly has a hugely negative psychological effect on us, and people who study suicide say that the loss of status is an extreme kind of predictor of kind of suicidal ideation. That's why I don't buy the Epstein conspiracy theories, because being accused of paedophilia and losing all of your status, is a major signal that you're going to be feeling extremely suicidal. So they find that the sudden loss of status is is especially dangerous. But also, I thought was interesting is it's also dangerous when you get left behind. So if the people, so you can just be in the same place, but if the people around you all accelerate in status, you could be left feeling depressed and possibly suicidal. So I thought that was interesting. And when you asked about kind of humiliation too, I mean, humiliation is connected to this, and kind of that one of the technical definitions of humiliation is it's the kind of it's not only the removal of all your status within a group, it's the removal of all your status which is so kind of profound and total that you're unable to claim status from them at any point in the future. Like it's done. You're kind of gone as far as they're concerned. You're so terrible there's no redeeming for you, and you're kind of kicked out. And so that is humiliation is again a universally feared state, and in certain kinds of people can make you extremely dangerous because the way that you restore the only way to restore your humiliation is by taking revenge on that group, by kind of using dominance and forcing forcing them to attend to you in status with violence.
That's right, and I really want to come back to that point, but I just want to pick up on this kind of falling out of the group piece, because I think that resonates. Because I think the highest risk group, certainly in the Australian Army, are young males 19 to 24 who have recently discharged from the Army, which absolutely 100%. And I think that I don't know the figures now, but it's significantly higher risk of suicide ideations than the kind of average population, as well as other military people, right? So there's a number of things there. That's that's the status-seeking age, 19 to 24. And I think you talk about testosterone, where you quote a good friend, Mike Martin, in there as well in the book, and that's kind of the hormone that drives us to seek status. But then when you, I guess, fall out for whatever reason, whether it's for medical reason or because you have a change of career or you have mental health issues or whatever it is, when you lose your group or your tribe, your status goes with that, and that then speaks to potentially why we have such a high, suicide rate amongst those young men in particular.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. It doesn't surprise me at all. So, when you're in the military, that's your status game. That's the game that you're playing for status. And so that's literally your identity, So that's who you are. That's your tribal reputation. And then to lose that, especially at that age, because, as you point out, adolescents and early 20s, we're especially interested in status, it is psychologically, extremely dangerous. And as you know, in the book, I tell the book begins with the story of this guy, Ben Gunn, who was imprisoned when he was, I think, 14 for killing a child who was younger than him. And he ended up being the longest serving life prisoner in the UK. And I interviewed him, and it turned out that the reason he was in prison for so long is because he didn't want to leave, because he became this kind of prison lawyer. He became this kind of feared, powerful individual inside the prison. And he said, I'm a big fish in here, and when I get out there, I'm no one. And when I interviewed him, he had left prison finally, but he was in a terrible state psychologically. Like he was in the midst of an appalling breakdown, and was describing sort of just being crumpled up on the floor in tears. So it's a similar thing, to live is to play status games, and that's one of the great meanings of our life, are the games that we're playing. So to take that away from somebody, especially at that age of 24, you're leaving them extremely vulnerable to mental health crisis, I think.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I mean, and the other thing that really stands out there is what you mentioned before. It's only relative. The status is relevant to your environment, right? So, if, the example you give about the guy that was in jail from a young age, and in that environment he was someone and something, but take him out of that context, never mind it for
Nothing.
the rest. He's nothing. And for the rest of us, we would have thought, oh, of course, he's out. You should be happy. You should be celebrating.
You should be happy. Yeah.
But obviously, in his mind, well, this is now a whole new game. It's a whole new world, not just a whole new game. I mean, everything is completely different. And then the other piece I really want to pick up on now is the dishonor piece. That when you're being dishonored, that actually can lead to violence. And I think you even talk about this in the book in terms of genocide, which you describe as highly moralistic. Can you explain that a little bit? Because I think this is really important, and we're seeing this play out literally right now in Ukraine due to Russian invasion. So can you maybe just explore that a little?
Yeah. So to I think to really understand this, you've got to. There's just an extra little piece of the puzzle that I need to explain, and that's that all of this is subconscious. So, we don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, today I'm going to go out into the world and pursue status.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's hidden from us. The conscious experience of life is not a game; it's a story. So we're living out these heroic stories and they're morally inflected of doing the right thing and the wrong thing and pursuing great goals. That's what it feels like to be a human. Even though the real politic subconsciously is this constant, eternal game that we're playing for status. And so that's what you see on the individual level, like in the book I tell the story of this incel spree killer Elliot Rodger who found himself continually rejected by attractive young women, and so his brain told him a story that the problem with the world was these terrible women, and he became very misogynistic and ended up killing a bunch of men and women before killing himself. So that's the classic kind of incel story. But what's really interesting about that incel story is it's the same story that was told in 1930s Germany on the level of the nation, but against the Jews. Status is deeply implicated in episodes of genocide, and it's the same as on the individual level. So when we tell a story that our status, our rank, is being unfairly reduced by these other people who are kind of behaving disreputably and dishonorably and are attacking us, then you've got the conditions for kind of terrible things happening, all the way up to the level of genocide. So, in the book, I say that the most dangerous people are men, because men use violence much more than women do. But also they're narcissists. So the thing about narcissists, Elliot Rodger was a narcissist. The thing about narcissists is that they automatically think that they are deserving of very high status. So when it's removed from them, they feel even more furious, and they're even more likely to be kind of pushed into violence. And that's exactly what you saw in the First World War, after the First World War. Before the First World War in Germany. So before the First World War, Germany was the wealthiest and most highly developed society in Europe. It had I think it produced 2/3 of all the steel in Europe, half its coal, 20% more electricity than Italy, France, and Britain combined. It was just ahead of everything, and they knew it. So people always say, how could this a highly advanced, cultured nation, how could they have fallen to the level of genocide? Which is really interesting, because that's why they fell to the level of genocide, because they were so high up, and then they lost the First World War, and they felt that it was completely unfair that they'd been stitched up, and of course the story was that they'd been stitched up by the Jewish population, so it was that sudden humiliating fall from that level of high status which created the conditions for the genocide. And when I was researching this, I found what was really interesting, and I had no idea about this, even having studied all this stuff at school, like we all do in the UK, was that during the 30s, Hitler actually dialed down his anti-Semitic rhetoric massively when he was doing his speeches, rather than attacking the Jewish population. He was promising massively restored status in the future. The Third Reich, the rebirth. Germany has been humiliated, and it was humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles. They had their faces.
If you'd like to hear the rest of this episode and gain access to all of the episodes of The Voices of War, simply become a subscriber using the link in the show notes. As you know, I will not feature any ads on the show, which is made possible solely through the support of our subscribers. If you find value in the content, you can become one now.